Well, g'day guys, part two. We'll carry on where we left off and hopefully we'll get it done within half an hour. Now, I'll just screen share up the old decision again for us. So, now as you can see, we left off where it says Fairgo provided Universal Imports and Andrew Peck a fair and reasonable opportunity to comment for the program. They did, and Andrew used his brains to not comment to fair go, because anything said they will twist and skew to suit them fucking selves. It then carries on to say fair go contacted Peck at a business and a business associate of his on the 18th of October, 3 weeks prior to broadcast. Now, who's the business associate? Because first TVNZ, they tried contacting me, lying, and then when I point this out to the BSA, they came back and say, oops, that was a typo. A typo is an incorrect letter in a word, not an entire fucking person being wrong. But no, then they turned around and said it was John Murphy they tried contacting, which again is a lie. I personally asked John. He said in no way, shape or form did Fairgo ever try contacting him. And now apparently we've got a date on the 18th of October. But we're going to be able to tell from that once Grace Tong supplies me with the Appendix 8, the timeline and evidence of contact between Fairgo and Universal Imports. Now, on the 19th of October, Fairgo followed up with a phone call and message to Universal Imports, who gave Fairgo another email address, which Fairgo emailed on that day, outlining many options for Mr. Peck, who Universal Imports said was in Japan. As we saw on the show, that was John, the car salesman at Universal Imports, who took the call to comment on the story, including Zoom interviews, FaceTime, or phone calls. He wanted no bar of Fairgo because he knows exactly how Fairgo treats the truth, which is completely subjective in their bloody minds. While filming on the road outside the dealership on the 11th of October, the Fairgo team told a Universal Imports employee that we were working on a story. Yep, and that employee said exactly what happened in the interview with Andrew Peck. He was there on the day when I was doing the interview, and he said, so in other words, from the horse's mouth, because there's no third-hand information here, says exactly what happened. On the 28th of October, Fairgo sent another email to Peck's business associate. Now, who would that be? Please identify who this business associate is. And the Universal Imports address asking for comment. Peck's professional social media accounts were also contacted asking him to get in touch. You'd think that Fairgo would get the point by now that he's not fucking interested, but they keep going. Of course, it's under the guise of fair and reasonable, isn't it? The sort of discussion shown in the Fairgo program is permitted under Broadcasting Standards and the Bill of Rights Act 1990. It is appropriate for a consumer affairs program such as Fairgo to discuss how businesses behave, and it is in the public interest, is it just, for these types of discussions to be broadcast? Really? Public interest to slag off without doing any factual investigation whatsoever. Regarding the allegations of intimidation, through the references to a photographer trying to snap her in the street and people ringing up, well, the one person that did ring up identified himself. There's no harassment. He had a 5 to 10 minute conversation with her, and I've published the entire call that they, nitpicked what they wanted for the narrative. As for the photographer trying to snap her in the street, that's exactly what Fairgo did. You may recall on the show, they're filming her and her son walking down Universal Drive with Universal Imports in the background, and they're filming her. So I hope that didn't cause her any alarm or anxiety. After all, Fairgo was photographing her and trying to snap her in the street, and they did. The program didn't make inferences or allegations as to who the photographer was. No, they just said that it had happened because of a paranoid Siobhan Kelly who thought someone was photographing her because of the photograph that appeared and the article shakedown, and there's a photograph there of her. She thought someone took a photograph of her from the street, where it was an actual still shot from him, from Andrew Peck, when he recorded going to her place to recover the loan vehicle. That's when she picked up her little car seat out of the car, God knows, or booster seat out of the car, and then storms inside and doesn't say a damn thing. Rude, rude, rude woman. Dare I say vile. Anyway, and dare I say woman, we'll just say adult male human, shall we? Adult female human, Freudian slip. Where were we? Photographer we're working for. Although a candid photograph of Sabon appears in the news story, she was texted by who we don't know. The item showed the freelance journalist ringing up Sabon Kelly, but only identified him as a freelance journalist. The item, Cars episode, showed the freelance journalist. Well, why didn't they show him identifying who he was on that same phone call? Because then they knew that they were going to be defaming this guy and saying that Steve Cook was intimidating and harassing with phone calls, because that would be defaming him in a public view, but they just keep it to freelance journalists. So again, skewing the narrative from the truth. Jurisdiction. Our role under the Broadcasting Act 1989 is to consider complaints alleging in respect of a specific program that a broadcaster has failed to maintain broadcasting standards as set out in Section 4 of the Act and in the Broadcasting Standards in New Zealand Code Book. For this reason, we cannot consider the aspects of the complaint which relate to copyright, i.e. the use of aspects of the complainant's YouTube videos, in our assessment of the complaint. We have considered the material broadcast against the standards raised in the complaint. We also considered whether it would be appropriate to decline to determine the complaint. Section 11 of the Broadcasting Act authorises the authority to decline to determine a complaint if it considers that the complaint is frivolous, vexatious, or trivial, or in all circumstances of the complaint, it should not be determined by the authority. The complainant's approach to the complaints process, including his online criticism of relevant people and correspondence, suggests he is not engaging in the process in good faith. Well, why don't you just go ahead and defame me in public by publishing this, Broadcasting Standards Authority? Consider yourself, you're going to be getting a little bit of a legal problem coming in the future by stating that. The Broadcasting Standards Authority, their group that met, are suggesting that I am not acting in good faith. I'm an open frickin' book. And maybe using it vexatiously. All right. So this is what they're saying. Maybe, so why did they come up with the determination? By their own previous statement here, Section 11 of the Broadcasting Act authorises them to decline to determine a complaint if it considers it frivolous, vexatious, or trivial. Well, clearly, by the fact that they've made a decision, means that they do not consider my complaint to be vexatious, frivolous, or trivial. And yet, in the same frickin' breath, in the same paragraph, they then go on to suggest that I am not engaging in good faith. How rude. And maybe using it. In this instance, we decided to determine the complaint in full, but caution. Like I give a fuck about your caution, Broadcasting Standards Authority. Here's my response to your caution. Fuck you. Caution. But Mr. Keane, that similar complaints may be declined in future. Well, is that right then? So you're foretelling the future. You're going to be biased to begin with, are you? Well, that's totally independent and impartial, isn't it? Honestly, by making a decision, it's not frivolous or vexatious or trivial, and yet they then turn around and say that I'm not acting in good faith, defaming my character and reputation in that instance. Gee, aren't I glad that I didn't publish it first to the public? They did. Naughty, naughty. The standards. The purpose of accuracy standard is to protect the public from being significantly misinformed, as you were during the Cars episode. It states broadcasters should make reasonable efforts to ensure that any news, current affairs, or factual program is accurate in relation to all material points of fact and does not mislead. Which, as we've all seen, of course they misled. The fairness standard requires broadcasters to deal fairly with any person or organisation taking part or referred to in any broadcast. It ensures individuals and organisations are dealt with justly and fairly and protected them from unwarranted damage. You didn't do fuck all to protect Universal Imports from unwarranted damage. And yes, it was unwarranted damage because you guys didn't prove nothing. Our analysis, oh great, so now the anal yeses, we have listened to the broadcast and read the correspondence listed in the appendix, really. The right to freedom of expression is an important right in a democracy, and it is our starting point when considering complaints. We weigh the right to freedom of expression against the harm that may have potentially been caused by the broadcast. Really, shame you don't treat freedom of expression of mine in the same fashion, considering you guys at the BSA went and made privacy complaints while you're acting in your public capacities against a phone call that I published and other videos trying to censor my free speech, my freedom of expression. But no, we won't talk about that, will we, BSA? We may only intervene when the limitation on the right to freedom of expression is reasonable and justified. No, any limitation on your rights must be reasonably, demonstrably justified according to the Bill of Rights Act. But then what do I know? These guys are lawyers, not me, eh? With the limitation on right to freedom of expression is reasonable and justified in light of actual or potential harm caused. Wow, we've already heard from Andrew the 6 weeks of hell he got from various people after they aired that show. Accuracy. Audiences may be misinformed in two ways: by incorrect statements of fact within the program, that happened, and or by being misled by the program as a whole. Same again. Being misled is defined as being given a wrong idea or impression of the facts, which is exactly what they did. The requirement for accuracy does not apply to statements which are clearly distinguishable as analysis, comment, or opinion, rather than statements of fact. Really. We consider the complaint to allege two key inaccuracies. A, Sabon was being harassed and or subject to unprofessional conduct by PEC and or Universal Imports through phone calls, including from the independent journalist. Text was being hit by PEC and or Universal Imports through phone calls, including from the independent journalist. So they're trying to say the independent journalist has got something to do with Universal Imports. Text, a Facebook post, and being photographed outside her house, which didn't happen. And the text and Facebook posts that had to do with anything sent from Andrew Peck, not once named anyone called Sabon Kelly. As I've said before, fair go identified Sabon Kelly as the person in those texts that was being referred to. And they didn't verify that with Andrew Peck, did they now? Because Andrew never made any comment. The item attributed to, in other words, the episode attributed material to PEC and or Universal Imports which was not from them, e.g. the news article, that the email to Fair Go. The news article, all right? Just be aware, remember these points. A, harassment, unprofessional conduct. The item stated that Sabon copped abuse, personal insults, and name calling. It provided examples listed in paragraph 2. One example was the phone call with a freelance journalist. The complainant submitted that an interview with a reporter was not harassment, which it isn't. Another example was a photographer trying to snap her in the street. As evidence of the photographer, TVNZ submitted a candid photo of Sabon was included in the news article which was sent to her, not by anyone we know. The complainant responded that this was a still frame from a video taken when Andrew Peck returned to recover their loan vehicle. Just ignore him. Sabon's comments about the abuse, such as "I've had to deal with people ringing up trying to intimidate me, and it was actually really vile what he was saying about me," were her own opinions and analysis of the situation, and are therefore not subjected to the accuracy standard. Oh, okay. So just let those people defame people on national television and have absolutely no responsibility for what you're publishing then. We consider it was not misleading to include the phone call with the freelance journalist as an example of the intimidation. So that is why, so they're taking the fact that because Fair Go provided that snippet of that phone call, then that's their example of intimidation that Sabon experienced following the MPDT ruling. The broadcast included a number of examples which depicted a pattern of behaviour. While in isolation, the phone call may not have been intimidating, it was shown in context alongside the news article and the Facebook post. News article had nothing to do with of Andrew Peck at all. It was not of his making. So what if he did a news article? He had no control over the release of it, and he is not affiliated or associated with that person at all with Universal Imports. And the Facebook posts don't mention Sabon's name. Sabon was sent an article which included an image of her from outside her house. Yeah, she was sent that by a friend of hers, a mutual friend. Now let's remember, these Facebook posts were posted on private groups, okay? It was a mutual person that knew Sabon and Andrew that saw it in that private group and fucking sent it to Sabon, all right? Andrew never sent it to her own friend did, okay? And again, doesn't state anything about her. All he says is there's a Karen. I don't think her name's Karen last time I checked. Sabon was sent an article which included an image of her outside her house. Whether it was taken by a photographer or as part of a video, it appeared to Sabon that she was being photographed without her knowledge outside her home. In this context, the specific details around how her picture was obtained and whether or not there was a photographer were not material to viewers' understanding of the program. So then why include it? You should have just said, Sabon's paranoia made her believe that she was being photographed through the bushes. That would be more factually accurate than, oh my God, I think someone's taking snapshots, because she doesn't realize her own photo in a video. Overall, we consider the broadcast was not materially misleading. Well, I consider you guys to be fucking wrong on this issue. The program depicted Sabon's experience following the dispute with Universal Imports Peck. Andrew Peck was quoted in the article and apparent author of a Facebook post. All of the harassment examples followed the dispute with the Universal Imports and referred to or reasonably appeared related to it. Whether or not Universal Imports or Peck were directly behind each event, they weren't behind any of it. The item inappropriately attributed material to Peck Universal Imports which was not from them. Yes, it did. The complainant is concerned that the item implied the email from the freelance journalist was from Peck. It suggested Peck sent Sabon the news article, which he didn't, and had written the news article himself, which he didn't, and it inaccurately suggested Universal Imports was behind the article, which they weren't. First, we note while the item identified Peck as the owner of Universal Imports, it discussed the situation with reference to Universal Imports as a business rather than attributing all activity to Peck specifically. It did not attribute the news article to Peck initially. It said what looked like a news story about her sent to her phone, which was full of quotes from Peck. Sabon said, it just goes beyond belief that a professional outfit that is conducting business in our community thinks this is acceptable. Viewers would understand this comment was a general comment about Universal Imports' conduct following the MPDT ruling. this was not specific about who sent the article to her and her viewers would have understood that Peck was quoted in the article, not the author of it, really. Later, the item describes the news article as their own news story. Well, if that isn't saying Universal Imports' own news story, okay, because that's what they're saying, which we accept could suggest it was connected with Universal Imports. Exactly. Misleading people. The complaint submitted the news article was written by freelance journalist and could not be attributed to Universal Imports or Peck. However, the news article was advocating for Universal Imports' position, just as Fair Go was advocating for Siobhan Kelly's position, and was sent to Siobhan following the NPDT ruling in her favour against Universal Imports. It also contained quotes from Peck and an image of Siobhan, which the complainant submitted was taken from a video taken from when Peck picked up their loan vehicle. Therefore, in this context, we do not consider it materially misleading for viewers to be left with the impression that Universal Imports was associated with the news article, even though their own news story was in the item or the Cars episode. Unreal. Regarding the email, this was also not attributed to anyone specific. There was a response to Fairgo's email too. That's their quote of what they said in the article. However, the reporter read the email. Siobhan reacted, saying this man is something else, which we accept viewers may have assumed was Peck. Well, there you go. You accept that that could be misleading. The accuracy standard is concerned only with the material inaccuracy. Yeah. For example, technical or unimportant points unlikely to significantly affect the audience's understanding of the program as a whole are not material. Well, I think reading out an email from someone that is not associated with Universal Imports and then making it out that it was from Universal Imports by directly saying beforehand, no explanation for the late payment, meaning that you've been talking to Universal Imports and implying that the email was from them just before you read out that. The accuracy standard is concerned, technicals, it's not material. As described above, the segment was about Siobhan's experience with Universal Imports and the backlash she experienced after receiving an NPDT ruling in her favour. Really? I thought it was about the NPDT's ruling and the fact that they've got no guts to force people to pay. I thought that's what it was about. That's what Fair Go seems to keep releasing time after time after time. But anyway, while it was not correct that this email was from Peck, really, so you're happy to admit that, we find it would not have been material misleading for the viewers to assume the response to an email sent to Peck's business was from Peck. Well, that's completely up to the reporter, isn't it? The reporter led people to believe that that email was from Peck. They didn't specifically state an email from the freelance journalist or anything, did they? No, they led people or misled them to believe otherwise. For viewers to have assumed a response to email as from Peck's business and was from Peck in the context of an item about a customer's experience with his business. Just see how they fucking just twist things around. Therefore, we do not uphold the complaint under accuracy. Fairness. The complainant had alleged unfairness to Andrew Peck, Universal Imports, the freelance journalist, and himself. Yep. Andrew Peck and Universal Imports. Under this standard, we have considered whether Andrew Peck and Universal Imports were dealt with fairly in the program, particularly with respect to whether Peck was given a fair and reasonable opportunity to comment. Nobody's denying that he wasn't given that fair and reasonable opportunity to comment. He chose not to. And whether the way the emails and social media comments about Siobhan were treated in the program fairly reflected the tenor of the overall events. Bullshit. Well, they didn't decide that, did they? If a person or organisation referred to or portrayed in a broadcast might be adversely affected, which he was, that the person or organisation should usually be given a fair and reasonable opportunity to comment for the program. He chose not to not have his words twisted against him. Before a broadcast, what is fair and reasonable will depend on the circumstances. And there's then more of their guidelines. We accept the nature of the item or CARS episode had the potential to adversely affect PEC and Universal Imports. So they know that the nature of it was going to adversely affect them. Given the portrayal of Sabon's experience in the claims, the business did not comply with the MVD order until Fairgo got involved. Another bullshit story. The broadcaster provided details of its attempt to contact PEC, his business associate, which they still haven't named, and Universal Imports. It didn't, they have named. TVNZ said the business associate is John Murphy. So they never attempted it. I'd like to see evidence of an email from Fairgo to John Murphy, to Central Car Company. I'd like to see that, because it didn't happen. I did not receive comment from PEC and his business associate, but received an email from the freelance journalist. Yep, because because Andrew sent it to John Murphy, and then John Murphy sent it to Steve Cook, and Steve Cook took it upon himself to contact the reporter directly and give him his 2 bits worth. That in no way implies that the freelance journalist has got any relation whatsoever to Universal Imports, just that he's the recipient of a 3rd, 4th, 5th hand document and is responding to Gil Higgins about it. The email was included in the broadcast, described as a response to Fairgo's email. The complainant had disputed TVNZ made any attempts to contact PEC's business associate and alleged it was unfair to PEC to imply the email came from him, which is exactly what they did. Based on the evidence provided to us by TVNZ of emails sent to PEC, his business associate and Universal Imports, we are satisfied it discharged its obligation to provide PEC and Universal Imports a fair and reasonable opportunity to comment. Why don't they just keep beating a dead horse? No one is debating whether or not they gave Andrew a chance to get his point through. Whoopty shit. He chose not to exercise his right to remain silent and not have his words twisted against him. No one ever denied this. Given the freelance journalist's email addressed the questions put to the business associate at Universal Imports in an email from the TVNZ reporter. No, actually, the email from Steve Cook to Gil Higgins addresses the fact that she can't even put a sentence or a question in a correct format. Then it criticizes her poor grasp of the entire situation, and then talks about John Murphy and what John Murphy would detect if he saw Sabon walking down the road. None of that has anything to do with Sabon Kelly and Universal Imports and the MVDT thing at all. It was reasonable for these comments to be included in the program, really. For the reasons outlined under the accuracy standard, we consider the way the emails and social media comments about Sabon were treated in the program fairly reflected the tenor of the overall events. In addition, the program was clear that Sabon was at fault for not obtaining a pre-purchase check. Really? I think, no fucking way they did that. They treated her as a victim, plain and simple. Said Universal Imports stepped up and repaired the vehicle following the first breakdown and the second breakdown, and was clear Universal Imports did eventually pay Sabon what she was owed. The complainant and freelance journalist. The complainant also alleged that the segment was unfair to him and to the freelance journalist as it would damage their reputations. Both the complainant and the freelance journalist voices appear in the broadcast in the material taken from the complainant's YouTube video. So they're admitting they breached my copyright. The complainant read out the news article in his video, sections of which appeared in the segment. Oh, it's a segment now, not an item. The freelance journalist recorded his phone call with Sabon, which was played in the complaint's video, YouTube video, and a section of it appeared in the segment. Again, They need to get their words right. Why can't they say cars episode? No, it's item segment, all to confuse and obfuscate what's going on. The fairness standard applies to those taking part or referred to in a broadcast. Neither the complainant nor freelance journalist were expressly referred to or featured in the story to the extent that they might be described as having taken part in it. No, of course not, because then you'd be openly defaming us, wouldn't you? For this reason, we consider that the standard does not apply to them. In any event, the use of material from the complainant's YouTube videos does not reflect negatively on the complainant nor the freelance journalist. Apart from breaching my copyright and not giving me any acknowledgement for the fact that it was my frickin' work. See, it's a double-edged sword. You wanted to use my shit, but you didn't want to give me credit for it. Because you're using my shit in a completely twisted narrative from the truth, and you would be defaming me in the process by giving me acknowledgement. And Steve. Ridiculous. Therefore, we do not uphold the complaint under the fairness standard. What do they do? Fuck all by the sounds of it, apart from read a whole heap of shit. Therefore, we do not uphold the complaint under fairness. For the above reasons, the authority does not uphold the complaint. Signed and for and on behalf of the authority, Susie Staley. Okay? Chair. Really, she looked like a female to me. Not a chair, but a chairperson, chairwoman, or chair adult human female. We'll go for that, eh? Now, in the bottom here, they list an appendix. The correspondent listed below was received and considered by the authority when it determined this complaint. Right, so first one, Mark King's complaint to TVNZ. Yep, no problem. I've got a copy of that. TVNZ's decision on the complaint. Well, that's their response to my complaint, where they didn't uphold it and said that they did nothing wrong, as they always do. Then my referral to the Broadcasting Standards Authority on the 6th of January. Then TVNZ's comment on my referral to the authority. Then my response to their bullshit story in response to my complaint to the authority. Then 6, TVNZ's final comments. Well, technically speaking, that's not TVNZ's final comments because 8's there, but TVNZ's final comments on response to my comments. And then my response to their response to my response to their responses comments. It's ridiculous. And then 8. Now I have 1 to 7. I've not been supplied 8. TVNZ providing timeline and evidence of contact with Universal Imports, 20th of May 2022. Now they sat on the 8th of June. Okay, I was given 15 to 20 working days after the 8th of June to expect this decision, which I got, funnily enough, bang on 20 working days at the end on my birthday. So I'm going to have to need this, aren't I? So what do you know it? Poor old Glenn Scanlon saying, don't talk to anybody on phone. I'm going to have to go and ring up our friend, our wonderful woman, Grace Tong, who's been nothing but professional and nice to me, and say, can you please supply me Appendix 8? Because I don't have a copy of it, and I'm going to need that to file the appeal, because I can't exactly be keeping things out. That would look deceptive of me, wouldn't it? To make sure that I haven't been supplied something for an appeal. That would be underhanded, wouldn't it, BSA? So anyway, guys, that's where I'm leaving it. As you can clearly see, bunch of hypocrites. The first half, they're just rambling off what seems to be a verbatim narrative of the actual show after the summary. Then they ramble off about not having jurisdiction, defame me by suggesting that I'm not acting in good faith, admit that it could be contrived as the email was seen from Andrew Peck, admit that quite a few other facts that I pointed out to be accurate, but still consider it fair and accurate, even though there's nothing but constant misleading crap. So we'll see what happens next, guys. I'm going to be filing an appeal in court. So, guys, there you go. That's the end result of their final decision. And as expected all along, nothing but lip service and protecting the state agencies. No impartiality there at all. Clear bias. Just by reading it out to you, you can clearly see that there's bias in their responses. They defame me in the process and have gone and published that on the 7th of July to everybody. So they've gone and openly published it to the public. Naughty, naughty. Their decision may be final, but it's not the end. So I'll see them, TVNZ, BSA, whoever. I'll see us in court over the appeal, and we'll see what goes on from then on, eh? But let's just bear in mind the last 2 times, or 3 times I've had to have any dealings with courts, I've won. So we'll see how we get on, shall we? I am getting some legal advice on this one as we speak. Hope to hear back mid next week about that, as to the merits of the appeal. All right. Must love and leave you. Thank fuck Glenn Scanlon's gone back over to Radio New Zealand, head of transition. Let's see if Broadcasting Standards Authority are going to not appear biased and act impartially and supply me what I'm legally entitled to have. All right. Catch us. Bye now.